Have you ever wondered what it truly means to be a hero? This is the story of Nia Johnson, a young woman whose life was forever changed on a rainy night in the Bronx. When faced with violence and fear, she chose to stand up, to fight back, and to save a life that wasn't her own. But this isn't just a story of survival, it's a story of quiet courage, of how one act of compassion can echo through an entire city. In the face of darkness, Nia found her light, and became a beacon of hope for everyone who would ever wonder if standing up was worth it. Get ready to witness a journey of resilience, strength, and the power of small, defiant choices that change everything. The evening had started like any other. In the heart of the Bronx, where the city's constant hum seemed to pause in fleeting moments of quiet, Nia Johnson stepped out of the community rescue center with her backpack slung over one shoulder. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked pavement. Neon lights flickered across shuttered storefronts, and the echo of distant traffic carried the city's restless heartbeat. She had worked a double shift, patching up scraped knees, calming frightened mothers, and sitting with lonely souls who just needed someone to look them in the eye and say, "I see you." Nia had done it all with that unwavering calm that people trusted. But tonight, she was exhausted, her feet aching in her worn sneakers, her shoulders heavy with the weight of the day. She tugged her jacket tighter against the damp night air, her breath visible in the coolness. As she walked, her mind drifted to small comforts waiting at home: the scent of lavender soap, the crackle of her old record player, the quiet of her small apartment where she could finally let her guard down. But fate had a way of rewriting even the simplest plans. Nia didn't know it yet, but she was walking straight into the center of a story that would ripple far beyond the cracked sidewalks of the Bronx. Halfway down the block, she noticed them. 3 figures clustered under the dim glow of a broken street lamp, their silhouettes sharp against the graffiti-scarred wall. At first, she thought it was nothing more than another heated argument in the night. Raised voices, too much liquor, the usual chaos that came with living in a city that never truly slept. But then she saw the older man. He was crumpled on the ground, arms wrapped around his head, trying to shield himself from the kicks and fists raining down on him. One of the attackers spat, his voice a snarl that carried down the block. The other 2 laughed, cold and hollow, like jackals scenting blood. Nia stopped. She felt her heartbeat quicken, her pulse ringing in her ears. She'd grown up in these streets, knew the rules. Keep your head down, walk on, don't get involved. But there was something in the way the old man cowered, the way his hands shook as he tried to cover his face, that tore through every instinct of self-preservation she had. In that instant, she wasn't just a rescue worker. She was a human being who couldn't stand by while another soul was broken under the weight of cruelty. She drew a breath that tasted like rain and fear and stepped forward. "Hey!" Her voice cracked the night like a whip, sharp and unwavering. The attackers froze for a heartbeat, heads turning in eerie synchronization. The tallest one, face half hidden beneath a hood, took a step closer, his expression twisting into a sneer. "Mind your business, lady," he said, his tone laced with something that sent a shiver down Nia's spine. But she didn't back down. Her voice was calm but fierce, steady as she took another step forward. "Leave him alone. He's done nothing to you." The words felt like fire in her mouth, born of all the nights she had tended to people who no one else would help. She saw the smallest of the 3 twitch, his eyes wide and frantic like an animal cornered. She knew that look. Desperation mixed with the reckless high of someone too far gone to think twice. "You want to play hero?" he spat, his voice trembling. The night seemed to hold its breath. Nia's own heart was a drumbeat, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not playing, I'm telling you to stop." She didn't even realize she'd taken another step forward, the distance between them closing. She could see the sweat on his upper lip, the flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. It happened so fast she barely registered it. The glint of metal in the streetlight, the way his hand moved with terrifying precision. A blade, no longer just a threat, but a promise of pain. She tried to step back, but he lunged forward. Pain exploded in her side, white-hot and all-consuming. She gasped, the world shrinking to that one point of agony as the knife slid in deep. Her breath hitched, a sob caught in her throat as she stumbled. The man yanked the knife back, and the sudden absence of it felt like a second wound. She fell to her knees, her hands instinctively clutching her abdomen as warmth spread through her fingers. Blood, thick and red and so very real. The attackers bolted, disappearing into the night like phantoms, but Nia was left behind, kneeling on the cold concrete, the world tilting around her. For a moment, everything was eerily silent. The street lamp above her flickered, a dying pulse of light that matched the frantic beat of her heart. She pressed her hands tighter to her wound, but she could feel the blood slipping between her fingers, unstoppable. Her vision blurred, the edges of the world going soft and gray. She could hear her own breathing, ragged, uneven. And then, from somewhere far away, the sound of hurried footsteps and a man's voice, laced with panic. "Hold on! Stay with me!" It was the taxi driver, the one who'd watched her day after day helping strangers. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he fumbled to apply pressure to the wound. "Stay awake, Nia. Don't you dare close your eyes," he pleaded. Nia tried to focus on his face, on the way his mouth moved as he spoke. She wanted to tell him she was trying, that she was still here, but the pain was too much, a tidal wave that crashed over every thought. She felt her body sway, her head dipping forward as the world grew dim. Her last clear thought was of the man she had tried to save, an old man with haunted eyes who had become, for one fleeting moment, the reason she chose to stand and fight. Then the world slipped away, the night swallowing her whole. And in that darkness, Nia Johnson's journey, the one that would shake the city and echo far beyond the Bronx, had only just begun. The world returned in shards of light and muffled noise. Nia drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind clawing for purchase in a fog of pain. The taxi driver's voice was the only anchor, a frantic whisper in her ear. "Stay with me, Nia. Don't go." She felt the jolt as he lifted her, the rough fabric of his jacket pressing into her cheek. Each step jarred the wound in her side, sending white-hot agony through her veins. She wanted to scream, but her mouth wouldn't open. Her body felt heavy, uncooperative, as if it belonged to someone else. They reached the community rescue center in minutes that felt like hours. The driver kicked the door open with his foot, his face pale and streaked with sweat. "I need help!" he shouted, his voice cracking like a whip. Inside, the center was quiet for the hour, the usual chaos of the day replaced by the hush of night. But the quiet shattered as soon as they saw Nia. One of the volunteers, Marissa, gasped when she saw the blood on Nia's hands. "Oh my God, Nia!" she cried, rushing forward. A second later, the small room was a flurry of movement. The radio crackled to life with an urgent call to 911. Hands reached out, lifting Nia from the driver's arms, laying her down gently on a stretcher that seemed to appear from nowhere. She tried to open her eyes, but they felt glued shut. She could hear everything, though. The rapid orders, the edge of panic in the voices she knew so well. "She's lost a lot of blood," someone said, voice tight with fear. "We need to stop the bleeding." Marissa's hands were steady despite the tremor in her voice as she pressed clean cloths against the wound. Nia felt the pressure, sharp and unyielding, and her body arched in protest. A sob tore from her throat, though no tears came. She had nothing left to give. A young man, barely older than Nia, leaned over her, his eyes wide with terror. "Nia, it's me, Mateo," he said. She knew Mateo. He was one of the new volunteers, eager and kind, the one who always stayed late to clean up. "You're gonna be okay," he said, his voice breaking. She wanted to tell him not to be afraid, that she had seen worse, but the words stayed locked inside. The minutes stretched, each second a battle. The paramedics arrived, pushing through the front doors like a storm. "What happened?" one demanded, his eyes scanning the room. "Stab wound to the abdomen," Marissa said quickly, her hands still covered in Nia's blood. "She's tachycardic. BP's dropping fast." "Get her on oxygen," the paramedic said, pulling out equipment with practiced efficiency. The hiss of the oxygen mask filled Nia's ears as it settled over her face. She drew a shallow breath, the cool air a fleeting relief. She could feel the stretcher shift beneath her as they lifted her, voices calling out numbers she couldn't comprehend. "BP 80/40, heart rate 150. She's crashing." They moved fast, weaving through the narrow halls of the center. The fluorescent lights overhead blurred into streaks of white. Nia felt like she was floating, her body numb and distant. She thought she saw her reflection in the glass of a door they passed, her face pale, eyes closed, hair matted to her forehead with sweat. It didn't look like her. It looked like a ghost. As they burst out into the street, the wail of sirens cut through the night. The ambulance doors flew open and Nia was inside. the world reduced to the tight space of the vehicle and the urgent voices around her. She could hear Marissa's voice one last time before the doors closed. "We're with you, Nia. You're not alone." Inside the ambulance, everything moved with terrifying speed. A paramedic pressed an IV into her arm, cold fluid flooding her veins. "Stay with me, Nia," he said, his voice a low, fierce mantra. She focused on the sound of it, the way he said her name like a promise. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she could stay. But her mind was slipping, sliding back into that darkness where nothing mattered. In that darkness, memories flickered, like tiny fires that refused to die. She saw the face of the old man she had tried to save, his eyes wide with shock and fear. She saw herself, a child in church on Sundays, her mother's hand warm and sure on her shoulder. She saw the faces of the kids at the center, the way they looked at her with trust, the way she had promised she'd always come back. And somewhere beneath it all, a voice, small but fierce, "You're not done yet." The ambulance jolted as it sped through the streets, the city flashing by in streaks of neon and shadow. The paramedic's face hovered above her, his brow furrowed with concentration. "She's losing too much blood," he said to his partner. "Call ahead. Tell them to prep trauma." Nia tried to open her eyes, to tell him she understood, but her body wouldn't listen. The darkness pulled at her, seductive in its quiet. She could feel her heart slowing, each beat a thunderclap in the silence. She didn't want to die. Not here, not like this. But the pain was too much, the world too far away. Suddenly she felt a hand on her forehead, gentle and warm. "Nia," the paramedic said again, softer this time. "You're gonna make it. You hear me? You're gonna make it." His words were the only thing that kept her tethered to the world. She tried to nod, just a fraction, but it was enough. The ambulance pulled up to the hospital doors, the jolt of the brakes rattling through her bones. She felt herself being lifted, the stretcher rolling over the uneven pavement, the fluorescent lights of the ER burning bright against the night. Voices surrounded her, a cacophony of commands and footsteps. Incoming stab wound, female, mid-20s, significant blood loss. The doors slammed open and she was inside, the cold air of the hospital washing over her. She could hear them calling out her name, could feel the hands on her, steady and sure. "Nia Johnson, stay with us." She wanted to answer, wanted to tell them she was fighting, but her lips wouldn't move. As they pushed her through the halls, she caught glimpses of familiar faces. Nurses and doctors she had laughed with over coffee, volunteers who had shared her burden day after day. Now their eyes were wide with fear, their hands trembling as they reached for her. She wasn't just another patient to them. She was one of their own. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her again was the ceiling lights passing overhead. Like stars in a sky she wasn't ready to leave. And as her world went black, one thought echoed through her mind. "I'm not done yet. I'm not done, Dot." The doors to the trauma room slammed open, and the harsh white lights above seared Nia's eyes as she was rolled in, the cold air biting at her skin. For a moment, she thought she was floating, her body weightless, her mind adrift. But then the pain came roaring back, a hot, relentless tide that crashed through her with every shallow breath. She heard the voices around her, rapid and urgent, each word slicing through the haze like a blade. "BP's crashing, 60/30. She's tachycardic, pulse 150. We need blood. O negative, stat." Nia's eyes fluttered open, just enough to catch glimpses of the figures moving around her like dancers in a fevered ballet. Dr. Patel was there, his face set in grim determination as he snapped on a pair of gloves. She had known him for years. He'd been the one to talk her through the decision to join the community rescue team, telling her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. "Nia, stay with us," he said, his voice calm and commanding. His eyes flicked to the nurse at her side, Elena, the one who always had a joke ready at the end of a long shift. Now her hands were steady, but her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line as she cut away Nia's shirt, exposing the wound that threatened to steal her future. Nia wanted to speak, to tell them she was trying, but all that came out was a ragged gasp. The oxygen mask pressed over her face, cool air flooding her lungs, but it felt like breathing through water. She could feel the slick warmth of blood beneath her, soaking into the thin mattress of the gurney, and the cold bite of metal as the surgical scissors sliced through fabric. "Hang in there, girl," Elena whispered, brushing sweat-damp curls from Nia's forehead. Her voice was tight, but there was a tremor of hope beneath it. "We've got you!" The room was a blur of motion, hands pressing, machines beeping, the shrill wail of a monitor that seemed to sync with the pounding in her skull. She felt the sting of another IV line slipping into her arm, the rush of fluids flooding her veins. It was like trying to hold back the tide with a single breath. Somewhere above her, the bright light of the overhead lamp burned like a sun. She focused on it, willing herself to stay awake, to keep breathing. But the edges of her vision were already fraying, darkness creeping in at the corners. In that darkness, memories flickered, shards of her life that refused to be silenced. She saw the children at the community center, their laughter bright and defiant in the face of a world that too often forgot them. She saw the old woman she'd carried groceries for, her eyes crinkling with gratitude as she pressed a warm hand to Nia's cheek. She saw the mural she'd helped paint on the community wall, a burst of color that promised hope to anyone who paused long enough to look. "Hold on," she told herself. "Hold on for them." "Pressure's still dropping. She's going into hypovolemic shock," Dr. Patel said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "We need to get her to the OR now." The words washed over her, their meaning slipping past like water over stone, but the tone was enough. She knew what it meant when voices took on that quiet intensity, when the room grew sharper, more focused. She had seen it too many times as a rescue worker, the fine line between life and death, and how easily it could be crossed. "Nia, can you hear me?" Elena asked, leaning close. Her eyes were wide and glassy, tears she refused to let fall. Nia blinked once, slowly, her lashes heavy as lead. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell her she was still here, that she hadn't given up, but the words wouldn't come. She felt the gurney start to move again, the world tilting beneath her. Doors swung open, the hallway flashing by in a blur of white and gray. She caught a glimpse of the waiting room through a gap in the curtains. Faces she knew, people who had become her second family. Mateo, pale and shaking, his hands clasped in front of him like a prayer. Marissa, her face streaked with tears, lips moving in silent hope. "She's one of us," someone said, their voice a low murmur that echoed in the sterile air. "We can't let her go." The doors to the operating room loomed ahead, the sterile white of them stark against the dark of the hall. A nurse pushed them open, and the bright lights inside spilled out like a promise. Nia felt the change in the air, the hush that always came before the storm. Inside, the surgical team was already in motion, gowns and masks, gloved hands and calm voices. Dr. Patel leaned over her one last time, his eyes locked on hers. "You're a fighter, Nia. You hear me? You've always been a fighter." He reached down, his hand warm and firm on her shoulder. "Stay with us." She tried to nod, but her body wouldn't listen. All she could do was look back at him, her eyes wide and unblinking, and hope he could see the answer in them. Then the mask descended over her face, the sweet chemical scent filling her nose. She felt herself slipping, the edges of the world dissolving into nothing. But just before the darkness took her completely, she saw the old man's face again, the man she had fought for, who had been nothing but a stranger on a dark street. His eyes were filled with pain and fear and something else, something like hope. In that final moment of awareness, Nia clung to that image. She clung to the memory of his eyes, to the knowledge that she had stood for someone who couldn't stand for himself. And in the quiet of her mind, a single thought echoed like a promise. "I'm not done yet." Then the world went black, and the fight to save her life began in earnest. The doors of the operating room closed behind them with a soft but final thud, shutting out the frantic world beyond. Inside, everything was white and bright, the air tinged with antiseptic and purpose. The surgical lights above Nia's head blazed like miniature suns, illuminating every inch of her pale, sweat-slicked skin. She lay there, still and small on the steel table, her dark curls matted to her forehead, her breath ragged beneath the mask. Dr. Patel moved quickly, his gloved hands steady as he barked out orders. "Vitals?" he called, his voice calm but urgent. A nurse read them out in a clipped tone, each number a grim confirmation of how close Nia was to the edge. "BP's 50/25 and dropping," she said. "Heart rate's 160. Another nurse was already hanging a bag of blood, the dark red liquid flowing down the tubing in a desperate attempt to replace what she had lost. "We're losing her," Dr. Patel muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing. "Let's move." Scalpel in hand, he made the first incision, the blade slicing cleanly through skin and tissue. The room went silent except for the beeping of monitors and the measured breathing of the team. In that sterile, tense air, there was no room for doubt, only action. Outside the operating room, the waiting area was a world away. Mateo sat hunched in a plastic chair, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. Marissa paced back and forth, her phone clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Every now and then she would glance at the doors, as if willing them to open and bring good news. The Community Rescue Center's director, Mr. Langford, stood with his arms folded across his chest, his usually stoic face crumpled with worry. "She's the best of us," he said softly to no one in particular. "She's the reason half of these kids have a place to come to. She can't be gone." His voice cracked, but he didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. There was still hope. Back in the operating room, the minutes ticked by like hours. Dr. Patel worked with the precision of a craftsman, his brow furrowed as he repaired the torn vessels, suturing the damage done by the blade that had cut so deep. The nurses worked alongside him, suctioning blood, handing him instruments, their movements synchronized in the practiced dance of saving a life. "Nia, stay with me," Dr. Patel murmured, though she couldn't hear him. He remembered her first day at the rescue center, how she had walked in with that quiet determination and a smile that reached her eyes. How she had stayed late on nights no one else wanted to, bringing sandwiches for the kids who were too shy to ask for food. How she had always stepped in, even when it meant putting herself in harm's way. She was more than just a colleague. She was a symbol of hope in a world that too often forgot people like them. As he worked, the room seemed to narrow to a single point, the steady beep of the heart monitor, the only thing keeping the silence at bay. For a moment, it wavered, flatlining in a chilling burst of sound. "No!" Dr. Patel barked, his eyes flashing. "Epinephrine, now!" A nurse injected the medication, and for a breathless second, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then, a flicker, a beat, another. The monitor's rhythmic beep resumed, softer, weaker, but there. A collective sigh of relief washed through the room, but no one paused. There was no time to celebrate, not yet. The hours passed, and outside the night deepened. The rain started to fall in earnest, drumming softly against the windows. In the waiting room, Marissa finally sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "She has to make it," she whispered. "She just has to." Mr. Langford placed a hand on her shoulder, his own voice rough with emotion. "She's Nia," he said simply. "She's stronger than anyone I know." Back in the operating room, the final sutures were placed, each one a promise, each one a plea. Dr. Patel leaned back slightly, his hands shaking with exhaustion. "We've done everything we can," he said softly. "It's up to her now." Nia lay still, her chest rising and falling with the mechanical assistance of the ventilator. Her face was pale, lips cracked, but there was a stubbornness in the lines of her brow that even unconsciousness couldn't erase. The team stepped back, the adrenaline fading, replaced by the quiet weight of uncertainty. As they cleaned up, Dr. Patel lingered beside her for a moment longer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You're not done yet, Nia," he said, his voice low. "You've got too much left to do." She didn't stir, but in that sterile room it felt like her spirit was listening. They wheeled her to recovery, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead as they moved. In the hallway, the waiting group surged to their feet, eyes wide and searching. Dr. Patel stepped out first, his face lined with exhaustion, but his gaze steady. "She made it through surgery," he said, and the words were met with gasps and muffled sobs. "She's not out of the woods yet, but she's alive." Mateo sank back into his chair, tears streaming down his face. Marissa covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with relief. Mr. Langford closed his eyes for a moment, a silent prayer of thanks passing his lips. They wheeled Nia past them, her body swaddled in blankets, machines beeping softly in a fragile rhythm. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Everything reduced to the sight of her small form on that gurney, fighting to stay. As they passed, Marissa reached out and brushed her fingers lightly against Nia's hand. "We're here," she whispered. "We're not going anywhere." In the quiet of the recovery room, Nia lay between the world of dreams and the edge of death. Her mind drifted through memories and shadows, faces of those she'd helped, voices of those who had believed in her. And somewhere deep inside, the same thought pulsed, quiet and insistent. "I'm not done yet." The night bled into dawn without anyone noticing. Outside the hospital windows, the first light of day broke over the Bronx, painting the skyline in pale gold and soft pink. But inside, time felt suspended, measured only by the soft beeping of monitors and the rise and fall of Nia's chest. In the recovery room, the world had shrunk to a single point: her bed. Machines hummed and dripped, and the air was heavy with the smell of antiseptic and the quiet prayers of those who waited. Marissa hadn't moved from her spot in the corner, her head bowed, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. Mateo sat slumped in a chair, his eyes red from a night without sleep. Mr. Langford paced the hallway, his phone forgotten in his hand, each step an attempt to outrun the helplessness that gnawed at him. The nurses moved with practiced calm, checking her vitals, adjusting her lines. They spoke in low voices, but every now and then one of them would pause and glance at her face, at the soft line of her jaw, the dark lashes that rested against her cheeks. It was in those glances that the weight of her life pressed close. She wasn't just another patient. She was one of them. She was hope. As the sun rose, the first soft rays of light slipped through the blinds, casting faint stripes across the floor. It fell across Nia's face, warming her skin, turning the pale bruises a softer hue. She stirred, just a flicker, a tiny movement that set the world on edge. Marissa sucked in a breath, her hands flying to her mouth. Mateo bolted upright, his chair scraping against the floor. "Nia," Marissa whispered, inching closer to the bed. Her voice was trembling, her eyes wide with hope and terror. The nurse at Nia's side leaned forward, her fingers gently brushing a curl back from Nia's forehead. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured. "Open those eyes for me." For a long moment there was nothing. Then, slowly, painfully, Nia's eyelids fluttered, her brow furrowed, as if the very act of waking was a battle. The world came back to her in pieces. The harsh brightness of the room, the rhythmic beep of the machines, the warmth of the sun on her skin. She took a breath, a shuddering, painful breath, and it felt like life itself. "Nia," Marissa said again, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's me. You're safe." Nia's lips parted, but no words came out. Her throat was raw, her tongue heavy. She blinked slowly, her gaze flickering around the room. Faces came into focus. Marissa's tear-streaked smile, Mateo's shaking hands, the soft light in the nurse's eyes. She tried to speak, but only managed a faint sound, a sigh, a question, a prayer. "You're okay," the nurse said softly, her hand gentle on Nia's shoulder. "You made it." Nia closed her eyes again just for a moment, the relief washing over her in a wave that left her dizzy and breathless. She wasn't sure how long she lay there, drifting in and out of awareness, but each time she woke, the faces were still there, familiar, safe, full of love. Hours passed in that quiet vigil. The morning light grew stronger, filling the room with warmth. Nurses came and went, doctors checked her charts, but no one rushed. Everything moved with a soft reverence, as if even the building itself knew that this was something sacred. At one point, Marissa leaned in close, her voice a whisper meant only for Nia. "You scared us all half to death, girl," she said, a wet laugh breaking through her tears. "But you're here. You're still here." Nia tried to smile. It hurt, but she did it anyway. The doctor arrived later in the morning, his white coat crisp, his face a map of exhaustion and relief. He checked her vitals, his touch gentle but sure. "You're not out of the woods yet, Nia," he said quietly, "but you're on your way back. Your body's fighting." She nodded faintly, her eyes heavy, but there was a spark there, a glimmer of the fire that had always set her apart. He paused for a moment, his expression softening. "You did something brave," he said, his voice low. "You didn't have to step in, but you did. And you saved a man's life." His words settled over her like a blanket, warm and heavy. She remembered flashes of it, the fear, the anger, the sharp bite of pain, but she also remembered why she had done it. Not because she wanted to be a hero, but because she couldn't walk away. As the doctor stepped out, Marissa brushed Nia's hand with her fingers. "He's okay, by the way," she said softly. "The man you saved, he's alive because of you." A tear slipped down Nia's cheek, hot and silent. She didn't know his name, didn't know who he was or where he had come from, but she knew, in the deepest part of her soul, that she had done the right thing. She closed her eyes again, the weight of exhaustion pulling her under, but this time she didn't fight it. She let the darkness take her, safe in the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that she was still here, that she was still needed. Outside the hospital, the city moved on. Cars honked, people hurried to work, the world turning as it always did. But inside that small room, time had slowed to the soft rhythm of her breath and the quiet promise of survival. Nia Johnson had faced the darkness and stepped back into the light. And though the journey was far from over, in that first breath of dawn, she had already proven one thing beyond any doubt. She wasn't done yet. As the morning unfolded, word of what had happened to Nia began to spread. It started as a whisper among her colleagues at the rescue center, a stunned hush that carried the weight of disbelief. By noon, the story had traveled beyond those walls, weaving through the streets of the Bronx like a thread of hope in a tapestry of hardship. Neighbors who had seen her rushing to help people in the dead of night spoke of her in low voices, their faces etched with worry and awe. "She's always been the one to help first," said Mrs. Ramirez, who ran the corner bodega. "Even when she was tired, she never said no." Kids who had once been too shy to ask for help now pressed their faces to the hospital glass, wide-eyed and silent. Inside, Nia drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams a swirl of faces and colors. She saw the old man's eyes, still wide with fear and something else she couldn't name. She saw the city streets glistening with rain and the broken streetlight that had borne witness to her stand. She saw her mother's face, strong and warm, telling her, "You were born for this, baby. Born to stand up." When she woke again, the room was filled with flowers. They spilled from vases, bright and defiant against the stark white walls. Cards were propped on every surface, small notes scrawled in hurried, grateful handwriting. Some she recognized, others were from strangers. Each word was a lifeline, each flower a reminder that she was more than the blood she had lost. Marissa was there, her smile tired but real. She held up one of the cards, reading it aloud in a soft voice. "Thank you for reminding us that courage still lives here." She looked at Nia, her eyes glistening. "You've touched more people than you will ever know, Nia." Nia shifted on the bed, wincing as pain pulled tight in her side. Her voice was a whisper, dry and cracked. "I didn't do it for this," she said, her eyes flicking to the flowers, the cards. I couldn't let them hurt him." "I know," Marissa said, her voice gentle. "That's why it matters even more." The nurse entered then, her steps quiet, her face lit with the kind of compassion that only those who have seen the worst can truly offer. She checked Nia's vitals, her fingers warm and sure. "You're healing," she said softly. "Faster than we expected. That's not nothing." Nia let her eyes close, exhaustion tugging at her again. But beneath it, there was something new, a flicker of strength, small but fierce. She wasn't whole yet. She wasn't ready to walk the streets again. But she was here, and that was enough for now. Outside her window, the city moved on. The traffic lights flickered red to green, red to green. Children laughed as they chased each other down the cracked sidewalks. Life kept going, relentless and beautiful. But for Nia, everything had changed. It wasn't just the pain that marked her now, or the scar that would forever tell the story of that night. It was the quiet knowledge that she had stepped forward when others might have stepped back. That she had chosen, in that one impossible moment, to be the kind of person her mother had always believed she was. The doctor came in later, his white coat rumpled from hours of work. He smiled when he saw her awake, a small but genuine expression. "You're a fighter," he said. "You've been through the worst of it. Now we just need to let your body catch up to your spirit." She tried to smile back, though her lips trembled with the effort. "I'm trying," she said softly. "I know," he said. "And you're not alone." He turned then, his expression shifting to something more serious. "There's someone who wants to see you," he said. "Someone very important." Nia frowned, confusion stirring in her foggy mind. "Who?" she asked, her voice thin. The doctor hesitated. "A representative from the governor's office," he said finally. "He's here to thank you, officially." Nia's breath caught in her throat. The weight of it pressed down on her, too big to wrap her mind around. She had never wanted this, never imagined that her name would be spoken in those rooms of power. She was just Nia Johnson, a rescue worker in the Bronx, a girl who had always believed that doing the right thing didn't need an audience. I don't need a thank you," she murmured. The doctor's eyes softened. "I know," he said, "but sometimes the world needs to see what courage looks like." He stepped out, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Nia closed her eyes, the steady beep of the heart monitor filling the silence. She thought of the old man she had tried to save, of his eyes, his fear, and the way he had looked at her when the darkness closed in. She thought of her mother, her voice warm and sure in her memory. "You were born for this, baby. Born to stand up." A tear slipped down her cheek, hot and silent. She let it fall, unashamed, because she wasn't crying for herself. She was crying for every person who had ever felt like the world was too big, too cold, too cruel to fight back. She was crying for the kids at the rescue center, for the neighbors who had no one else to stand up for them. She was crying because she had proved, in that one impossible moment, that sometimes a single act of courage could light a spark in the dark. And as the sun climbed higher, filling the room with light, Nia Johnson let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. Nia lay in the bed, her breath slow and measured, the dull throb of pain, a steady drumbeat in her side as the quiet of the recovery room pressed close around her. But there was a new tension in the air, something that buzzed just beneath the sterile scent of antiseptic and the hushed footsteps of nurses passing in the hallway, and she felt it even before the door clicked open to reveal a tall man in a dark suit, his presence filling the space like a shadow stretching across the floor. He held a folder pressed to his chest, the seal of the governor's office gleaming gold against the deep blue of the cover. And for a moment, Nia couldn't breathe, her world narrowing to the slight smile on his face and the way he inclined his head in quiet respect. He spoke softly, his voice low and measured. "Miss Johnson, I'm here on behalf of Governor Carter. He wanted you to know that what you did was seen, that it matters, that you matter." She blinked, her mind fuzzy and slow, her fingers trembling where they clutched the edge of the blanket. She had never imagined herself in the orbit of men like this. Men whose voices carried weight and consequence. She had spent her life in the shadows, in the alleys and broken streets where sirens were the only music. And kindness was something you gave without expecting it back. The man stepped closer, his eyes steady. In his hands he held a letter, thick cream paper sealed with gold. He offered it to her and she took it, her fingers brushing his as she broke the seal. The words blurred at first, then came into focus, each line a testament to the impossible night she had survived. It spoke of her courage, of the way she had stood up when others would have looked away, of the man she had saved. Not just any man, but a decorated veteran, a trusted friend of the governor's inner circle. And it ended with an invitation to meet the governor, to be recognized not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of the city's resilience. She let the letter fall into her lap, her throat tight, tears stinging her eyes. "I didn't do it for this," she whispered. The man gave a small nod, his expression soft. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters even more." Outside the window, the sun had climbed high, throwing long stripes of gold across the floor. And in that light she felt the weight of every moment that had brought her here. The kids at the rescue center with their shy smiles and hopeful eyes. The old man shaking hands as he tried to cover his face. The moment she had stepped forward not because she was fearless, but because she couldn't bear to be the kind of person who did nothing. She thought of her mother, her voice always strong. "Baby," she would say, "you don't turn away from the darkness, you bring the light." And in that memory, in the quiet strength of those words, Nia found her center again. She looked up at the man in the suit, her voice thin but certain. "When is it?" she asked. "The meeting?" He smiled. 2 days. He said, "The governor wants to meet you in person, to thank you face to face." She nodded slowly, the motion sending a sharp pain through her side. But she didn't flinch. She was alive. She was still here, and that was enough. For now, the man turned to go, pausing with his hand on the door. "You should be proud," he said softly. But Nia only looked away because pride wasn't what she felt. Not really. What she felt was something deeper, something quieter and stronger than any headline or ceremony. She felt the pulse of purpose, steady and true in her chest. When he left, the room fell silent again, the letter heavy in her lap. She read it once more, slower this time, letting each word settle into her bones. Outside the door, she could hear Mateo's voice, low and worried, and Marissa's laughter, thin and shaky. The sounds of the people she had fought beside, the people she had chosen to stand for. And in those sounds, she found a kind of peace. Later, when the nurse came to check her vitals, she asked in a small voice, "How's the man I saved?" The nurse's eyes softened. "He's recovering," she said. "He asks about you every few hours. He wants to see you." Nia closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't know his name, didn't know the lines of his story, but she had seen the way he had tried to stand up, even when he was outnumbered and afraid, and that was enough. Enough to remind her why she had run toward the danger instead of away. In the afternoon, she drifted in and out of sleep, the light shifting across the walls, the world outside moving on in its relentless rhythm. She dreamed of the rescue center, of the laughter of children and the quiet strength of those who had nothing but gave everything. She dreamed of her mother's hands, warm and sure, and of the old man's eyes, bright with something like gratitude. And when she woke, it was with a soft smile on her lips, because she knew now that this story wasn't just hers, it was theirs. It belonged to every person who had ever chosen to stand up for someone else, no matter the cost. And in that truth, she found the courage to take the next breath and the next, and to face whatever would come when the doors opened and the world came calling for the girl who had refused to look away. The next morning dawned with a gentle light that spilled across the hospital floor, soft and warm against Nia's skin as she lay in bed, her eyes half open. The steady beep of the heart monitor, a metronome that counted the slow march of her recovery. She shifted slightly, wincing as pain sparked through her side. But she welcomed it, because pain meant life, meant breath, meant she was still here and not just a fading echo in the minds of those who loved her. The nurse brought her a tray of food she barely touched, her stomach rebelling at the thought. But she forced herself to take a sip of water, each swallow a small defiance against the weakness that threatened to swallow her whole. She could hear the murmur of voices outside the door, snippets of conversation that faded and returned like waves against a shore. Mateo's voice, low and anxious. Marissa's softer, threaded with relief and exhaustion. And in those voices, Nia heard the shape of the world that waited beyond this room, the world she would soon have to face. The nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, came in to check her vitals, her touch gentle but her expression focused. She smiled when she saw Nia watching her. "You're getting stronger," she said softly. "Your color's better, your numbers are holding." Nia tried to smile back, her lips dry and cracked, but the effort felt good, felt like the first real step back to herself. She took another breath, deeper this time, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest, feeling the way her ribs expanded around the wound that had almost ended her. And she closed her eyes for a moment, letting that breath root her in this new reality. Later, Marissa came in, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles beneath her eyes, but a light in them that hadn't been there before. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "You scared me," she said, her voice trembling. I thought we'd lost you." Nia reached out, her hand shaking but steady enough to find Marissa's, their fingers tangling together. "I'm still here," she whispered, and in those 3 words was the promise of everything she still had left to give, everything she still had left to fight for. "The man you saved." Marissa paused, her lips curving into a small smile. "He's been asking about you. He wants to thank you in person." Nia swallowed hard, her throat tight. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to carry the weight of a man's gratitude when all she had done was refuse to stand by. But she nodded slowly. "I want to see him," she said, not because she needed his thanks, but because she needed to see for herself that he was alive, that the choice she made in that dark street had meant something, meant everything. Marissa's smile widened. "I'll tell them," she said, standing up and brushing a hand across Nia's forehead, her touch light like a blessing. After she left, Nia lay back against the pillows, her eyes tracing the patterns of light on the ceiling. She thought of the letter from the governor, of the man in the suit with the kind eyes, of the way the world seemed to tilt and shift around her now. She had never wanted this, never wanted to be the center of anything. She had always been the quiet one, the girl in the background, the steady hands and warm voice that kept the world from falling apart for everyone else. But fate had a way of shining a light on those who never asked for it. And as much as she wanted to fade back into the quiet, she knew that this was her path now, her purpose. Later that afternoon, the door opened and a man stepped inside, tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp and clean, his face lined with age and experience, and in his eyes was the same haunted gratitude she had seen that night. He stood there for a moment, silent. Then he stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his words simple but heavy. Nia shook her head, her voice soft. "You don't have to," she said. But he shook his head too, his eyes bright. "No," he said firmly. "You do. You saved my life. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." She looked at him, really looked at him. The lines of his face, the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke, and she saw the truth of it. Saw the way the world could change in an instant, the way a stranger's courage could become the difference between life and death. He reached out then, his hand warm as he took hers. "Thank you," he said again. And in that simple phrase was the weight of everything he couldn't put into words. Nia squeezed his hand, her own eyes damp. "You're welcome," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. After he left, she lay there in the quiet, her heart full, her mind buzzing with the knowledge that she had done something that mattered, that would echo long after the bruises faded and the pain dulled. She thought of the governor's invitation, of the ceremony that waited for her, and a part of her wanted to hide, to slip back into the shadows and let the world forget her name. But she knew she couldn't, because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever felt small, every person who had ever been told to keep their head down and mind their own business. It was about the truth, that one voice, one act of courage, could change everything. And so she took another breath, deeper this time, and she let herself believe, really believe, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 2 days later, the hospital room was a different world, the air humming with the quiet anticipation of something bigger than the soft beeps of machines or the muted footsteps of nurses. Nia had been up on her feet for the first time that morning, a slow and careful shuffle across the floor, her hand on the IV pole, her breath tight but sure each step. A promise to herself that she was still moving forward, still fighting. She dressed with care, her hands trembling as she buttoned the simple navy blouse. Marissa had brought her. The mirror above the sink showed her face pale but determined, her dark eyes clear and unwavering. The scar at her side, still tender, a line of memory she would carry forever. But she stood tall in the reflection, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted when the nurse wheeled her out of the room. The hallway was lined with faces. She knew faces she had laughed with over late-night coffee and early morning exhaustion. Faces that had once been just colleagues, but now were something. More family. They nodded at her, some smiling, some with tears in their eyes, and she felt every look like a hand on her back, pushing her forward. The car that waited outside was black and sleek, the man in the dark suit holding the door open with a quiet dignity. His eyes met hers, and in that brief exchange, there was no need for words. She climbed in the seat, soft and unfamiliar, beneath her. The city moved past the window in a blur of brick and steel and neon, the Bronx she had always known, but different somehow, as if the streets themselves had shifted to make room for the weight of what she had done. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers tracing the seam of her blouse, her heart a steady drumbeat in her chest. As the car rolled toward the heart of the city, she thought of the children at the rescue center, their laughter, the way they clung to her when they were scared. She thought of the old man's eyes that night, the way they had widened with fear and then relief. She thought of her mother's voice echoing in her mind, "You bring the light, baby. Don't you ever forget." That the car pulled up to the steps of the governor's mansion, grand and imposing white columns gleaming in the soft morning light. The man in the suit offered his hand to help her out, and she took it, her fingers cool against his warmth. The crowd was small but focused reporters with cameras that clicked like insects in the quiet morning aides with earpieces and tablets, their faces polite and composed. She kept her chin up, her shoulders straight, her breath slow and even. The doors opened and she stepped inside. The marble foyer gleamed beneath the soft light chandeliers glittering above like frozen constellations. A woman with a kind smile greeted her. "Miss Johnson, thank you for coming," she said, her voice gentle as she led Nia down a long hallway to a set of double doors. Beyond them, she could hear the quiet murmur of voices, the soft rustle of papers. When the doors opened, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to her, and, for a moment, Nia felt the weight of it all settle on her shoulders. But she didn't flinch, didn't shrink. She stepped forward, her footsteps muffled against the carpet. The governor stood at the far end of the room, tall and dignified, his hair silver at the temples, his eyes warm. As he watched her approach, beside him stood the man she had saved, dressed in a crisp suit, his posture straight, but his eyes soft with gratitude. They both stepped forward as she neared, and the governor took her hand, his grip firm but kind, Miss Johnson. He said, his voice resonant with the weight of his office. Today we gather not to speak of politics, but of courage, real courage. He turned to the assembled crowd. His words measured each one, striking like a hammer. She didn't have to step in that night. She didn't have to risk her life for a man she didn't know, but she did. And in doing so, she reminded us all of who we aspire to be. He turned back to her, his eyes bright. She didn't ask for recognition, but that's exactly why she deserves it. He reached for a small box, a velvet case that he opened to reveal a medal glinting in the soft light. Miss Johnson, on behalf of the people of this city and the state, I award you the Governor's Medal of Valor, he said. She felt her breath catch her chest tightening as he pinned the medal to her blouse, the medal cool and heavy against her heart. The room erupted in applause, but it felt like a hush to her ears. Her eyes met the man she had saved, and in them she saw not just gratitude, but something deeper, something like kinship. He stepped forward, his voice low and rough with emotion. You didn't just save my life. He said you saved my faith in people. Nia swallowed hard, her voice a whisper. I just did what anyone would have done. He shook his head. No, he said, not everyone has your kind of courage. She felt the truth of it in the quiet that followed, in the way the room seemed to breathe around her. The governor took her hand once more, his voice softer now. Miss Johnson, your story. He's traveled far beyond this room. It's a reminder that one act of bravery can echo louder than 1,000 speeches. He paused, his eyes searching hers. Do you understand what you've done? She nodded slowly, her voice calm, but sure. I understand that I couldn't look away, she said, and in that simple sentence was the weight of everything she had carried. That night the cameras flashed again, but she barely noticed her focus was on the faces around her. The people who had stood up and fought for her life as she had fought for his. The governor stepped back, a smile warming his eyes. You are a light, Miss Johnson, he said, and in this world we need all the light we can get. The applause rose again, a soft wave of sound that washed over her, but in her chest, in the quiet places that no one else could see, Nia felt something deeper than pride, deeper than relief. She felt peace. She had stood up, she had survived, and now she would go on. Not because she wanted the world to see her, but because she knew that even in the darkest night there was always someone worth standing for. The ceremony ended, but the echo of applause still hummed in Nia's ears as she stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The world outside felt different, the air clearer, the colors sharper, the city's noise, a muted backdrop to the quiet storm. Inside her, she walked down the steps slowly, each step, a measured promise to herself that she would keep moving forward. The man she had saved stood at the bottom, waiting for her, his eyes bright with gratitude. He took her hand in both of his grip warm and strong. You didn't just save me, he said. You reminded me that even in the worst moments, there is still good in this world. She nodded, her throat tight. The cameras clicked around them, but she barely noticed her focus on the man, whose life she had refused to let slip away. You're alive, she said softly. That's all that matters. He smiled, a small quirk of his lips that spoke more than any words. Thank you, he said again. And in that simple phrase she heard the weight of everything he had carried that night. The fear, the pain, the fragile hope. She let his hand go, stepping back into the waiting car. The ride back to her apartment was quiet, the driver respectful, his eyes fixed on the road ahead as the city blurred past the tall buildings, the crowded sidewalks, the bright graffiti that spilled color across every blank wall. Nia watched it all, her reflection in the glass, a pale ghost framed by the flicker of neon and sunlight. She thought of the rescue center, the kids who would be waiting for her, the way Mateo had cried when he saw her alive, the way Marissa's laughter had cracked open with relief. She thought of her mother's voice, "Baby, you bring the light, don't you ever forget that." And she let those words settle in her chest, a quiet anchor that held her steady when the car stopped outside her building. She stepped out, her feet finding the familiar cracks in the sidewalk, the stoop where she had spent summer nights talking with neighbors, the old man who sat on the corner whistling jazz tunes under his breath. Today, he paused his song, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw her back on her feet. You're a fighter, he said, his voice a rough melody of pride. She nodded, a soft smile tugging at her lips. I had good teachers, she said, and she meant every word. The climb up the narrow stairs to her apartment was slow, her breath short, her side aching. But each step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. The small space she called home was exactly as she had left it. The couch still draped in the old quilt, her mother had made the faint smell of lavender from the candle she'd forgotten to blow out that night. The night everything had changed. She paused in the doorway for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her like a familiar blanket. This was her sanctuary, her space to heal and breathe. She set the small box with the metal on the table, its weight a reminder of what she had survived, but also of what she had chosen to stand for. She moved to the window, pushing it open to let the summer air wash in the sounds of the city below, the distant laughter of children, the low thrum of music from a passing car. It was all life, pulsing steady and sure. She closed her eyes for a moment, her hand resting on the scar at her side, the place where she had almost ended and almost begun. She thought of the governor's words, of the way the man she had saved had looked at her as if she had given him back more than breath, more than heartbeat. And she realized in that stillness that what she had given him was the same thing she had given herself: hope. The next morning, she woke to the soft light of dawn spilling across her bed, her body stiff but stronger, her spirit quiet but unbroken. She rose slowly, each movement a small victory, and dressed in simple clothes that felt like her. A soft shirt, jeans, worn soft by years of wear. She laced her shoes with steady fingers, her reflection in the mirror. A woman who had walked through fire and come out whole. The walk to the rescue center was short, but each step felt like a journey. The kids were already gathered in the yard, their laughter a bright burst of sound that made her chest ache with something like relief. Marissa saw her first, her face breaking into a grin that was all teeth and tears. "You're back," she said, running to pull Nia into a careful hug. "You're really back." Nia smiled, her arms tight around her friend. "I told you I would be," she said, and in that moment she felt it all, the weight, the fear, the quiet triumph of survival. The kids gathered around, their eyes wide, their voices a chorus of questions and wonder. "Are you okay, miss? Nia, did it hurt? Are you coming back to stay?" She knelt down, her knees stiff, but her voice soft. "I'm okay," she said, "and yes, I'm coming back." Her hands rested on small shoulders, her heart full with the knowledge that this was why she had chosen to stand up that night. Not for medals or headlines, but for them, for every soul who needed to see that standing up was always worth it. As the sun climbed higher, she rose to her feet, her eyes clear, her breath steady. She was Nia Johnson, survivor, rescuer, light in the dark. And though the road ahead would be long and the scars would always be a part of her, she knew with every breath that she was ready to keep walking forward, one step at a time. The door to the rescue center swung open with a quiet creak, and the smell of fresh coffee and faint bleach wrapped around Nia like an embrace. The moment she stepped inside, the hum of voices, the clatter of chairs, the soft laughter that echoed through the halls, it all felt like coming home. Mateo was the first to see her, his eyes wide, his hands frozen around the mop handle he had been using to scrub the floors. He blinked once, twice, and then his face split into the biggest grin she had ever seen. "Miss Nia," he breathed, like the words were a prayer. She smiled, her heart full as she stepped closer, her voice soft but certain. "I told you I'd come back, Mateo," she said, and in that simple truth was the promise she had carried through every breathless moment in that hospital room behind him. The kids peeked out from the common room, their eyes wide and bright. Some of them she'd bandaged, scraped knees for others. She'd found winter coats that fit just right, every one of them. A piece of her heart, she knelt. Slowly, her side still tender, but her voice warm and sure. "Hey, you little troublemakers," she teased, her fingers brushing against small shoulders. The smallest one, Maria, with her gap-toothed smile and bright eyes, clutched at Nia's sleeve. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice shaking, and Nia nodded. "I'm okay," she said, and her smile was real, because in this place, in this moment, she rose to her feet, her breath steady, her shoulders square as she moved deeper into the center. Marissa was at her desk, the phone cradled against her ear, her fingers tapping out notes on a pad. But when she saw Nia, she froze mid-sentence. The relief that flooded her face was like dawn breaking. She dropped the phone into its cradle and stood up, her arms wrapping around Nia in a fierce hug that spoke louder than any words. "You're really here," she said, her voice thick. And Nia hugged her back, her own eyes damp, but her smile unwavering. "I'm really here," she said, and it felt like a vow. Around them, the center hummed with life. Kids laughing, volunteers moving with purpose, the quiet thrum of music from an old radio in the corner. It was the heartbeat of the Bronx, messy and beautiful and full of stubborn hope. Nia walked through it all, her hand brushing against familiar walls, each step a quiet reclaiming of the space she had almost lost. She paused by the board that listed emergency numbers and upcoming events. Her name was still there, handwritten in black marker under volunteer coordinator. And seeing it made her throat tighten, because it wasn't just a name. It was a promise, a lifeline to everyone who walked through those doors. Later that morning, she sat with the kids in the reading corner, their voices a soft murmur around her as they leaned in close to hear the story. She read, her voice low and steady, the words weaving a quiet magic that wrapped them all in its spell. When she closed the book, Maria looked up, her small hands pressed together like she was holding something fragile. "Miss Nia," she said softly, "why did you go help that man?" Her eyes were wide, earnest, the question simple and pure. Nia took a breath, her gaze steady on those small, trusting faces, because she needed them to understand that what she had done wasn't something special, it was something human, because she needed them to know that they could do it too. She smiled, her voice gentle. "I helped him because he needed someone," she said, "because sometimes the only thing that stands between someone and the dark is another person willing to be a light. And I want you to remember that." "Okay." Her words settled in the room, soft but weighty, and the kids nodded solemnly, their small faces lit with something that felt like wonder, or maybe just the first spark of understanding after the story time. She moved to the kitchen where the volunteers were packing lunch bags for the evening outreach. Her fingers traced the edge of the counter, the familiar worn groove where she had spent countless nights making sandwiches and brewing coffee for the men and women who came in from the cold. She rolled up her sleeves, ignoring the pull in her side as she joined them, her hands working with the quiet efficiency of someone who had always found peace in the simple act of giving one of the volunteers, a young woman named Lila, who had only joined a few weeks before, looked up at her with wide eyes. "Miss Nia," she said, "I heard what you did. I heard you saved that man's life." Nia paused, her hands stilling for just a moment, and then she shook her head, her smile soft. "I was just there," she said simply. "Anyone would have done the same." Lila shook her head, her eyes bright. "No," she said, "not everyone. Not everyone is brave enough to stand up." And that truth settled in Nia's chest, a quiet ember of warmth, because she had never thought of herself as brave, only as someone who couldn't look away. The day moved on, the sun climbing high in the sky, casting long shadows through the windows. But inside the center, there was only the steady rhythm of work and laughter and life. Nia felt it all, the pulse of this place, the way it thrummed with possibility, and she knew with every breath that this was where she was meant to be. Later, as she locked up for the night, the last of the volunteers waving goodbye, she stood in the doorway for a moment, the warm summer air brushing against her skin, the city stretching out before her, vast and alive. She closed her eyes, her hand pressed over the spot where the knife had cut deep, where she had almost lost everything. And she took a breath that was steady and strong, because she knew now that the scar was just a part of her story, not the end of it. And when she opened her eyes, she stepped forward into the waiting night, ready to keep going, ready to keep fighting, ready to keep being the light. That night, Nia sat on the edge of her bed, the medal from the governor resting in her palm, the medal cool and smooth against her skin. It felt heavy, but not like a burden, more like a promise. The soft lamplight turned it into a small sun, a glimmering reminder of everything she had fought for, everything she still carried inside her. She turned it over slowly, her fingers tracing the engraved words, "Courage in the face of darkness," and she let those words settle in her chest, steady and warm. Outside her window, the city hummed the low murmur of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, the faint laughter that drifted up from a late-night gathering on the stoop. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds wash over her. The heartbeat of the Bronx, the place she had always called home, the place that had shaped her into the woman she was the next morning. She woke early, the dawn light painting her small apartment in soft gold. She brewed a pot of coffee, the bitter smell filling the air, and sat at the kitchen table. Her hands wrapped around the chipped mug, she took a sip, her thoughts quiet but insistent. She knew what she had to do. She wouldn't let that night be the end of her story. She wouldn't let it be the thing that defined her. She was more than that night, more than the scar that would forever mark her skin. She was a rescuer, a fighter, a girl who had learned to stand up. No matter how hard the world tried to knock her down, she dressed simply, pulling on her worn jeans and the soft cotton shirt that had always made her feel like herself. She slipped the medal into the drawer of her nightstand, closing it with a soft click. It wasn't about the medal, it was about the choice she had made, and the choices she would keep making. Every day she walked to the rescue center, the morning air cool against her skin, the city waking around her in a slow bloom of color and sound. The volunteers greeted her with quiet smiles and warm hugs. Their relief still fresh in their eyes, she joined them at the tables, packing care. Kits for the homeless, her hands moving with the surety of long practice. The kids came in later, their laughter a bright thread that wove through the steady rhythm of work. Nia paused to watch them for a moment, her heart swelling with something like hope. They were why she had always kept going. Why she would always keep going, because they deserved a world that was safe, a world where someone would always stand up for them. Later that day, she went to the community center, where she had once spent her weekends teaching first aid to anyone who wanted to learn. She stood in front of the small group, her voice steady as she spoke about tourniquets and compressions, about how to keep your head when the world was falling apart. She didn't talk about the night in the alley, didn't mention the knife or the blood, but in the quiet strength of her voice, they heard it anyway. They saw it in the way she held her shoulders, in the calm, sure way she moved around the room. Afterward, a young woman with nervous eyes approached her, her voice shaking. "I'm scared," she said. "I don't think I'd be brave like you." Nia looked at her, her own eyes soft and steady. "It's okay to be scared," she said. "Fear isn't the enemy. Hesitation is." She took the girl's hand, pressing it gently. "You don't have to be fearless to stand up. You just have to decide to do it anyway." The girl nodded, a slow, small smile breaking across her face. And in that moment, Nia saw the spark of something fierce and bright. She walked home as the sun set, the sky painted in streaks of pink and orange. The world seemed softer somehow, the hard edges worn smooth by the quiet determination in her heart. She stopped at the corner bodega, picking up a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. The old man behind the counter grinned at her, his eyes crinkling with kindness. "Glad to see you back on your feet," he said. She smiled back, her voice soft but strong. "Glad to be here," she said, and she meant every word. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, her breath easy, her steps sure. She set the groceries down in her kitchen and stood by the window for a long moment, watching the city lights flicker and dance in the dark. She thought of the man she had saved, of the way his eyes had looked into hers that day in the governor's mansion, and she knew that what she had done mattered not because of the recognition or the ceremony, but because it had been right. Because it had been human. She took a deep breath, the night air cool and sweet on her tongue, and she felt the quiet certainty of her purpose settle deep in her bones. She was Nia Johnson, rescuer fighter light in the dark, and she was just getting started. The next morning, Nia woke before the sun, the soft blue light of dawn creeping across the ceiling. She lay there for a moment, listening to the steady rhythm of her breath, the quiet strength of her own heartbeat, a reminder that she had made it through the darkness and was still here, still fighting. She dressed in comfortable clothes, pulling on her old rescue center hoodie, the fabric worn soft by years of use. She tied her hair back, her fingers steady and sure. She looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection calm, her eyes bright with a light that had never really gone out. She walked to the rescue center, the early morning streets quiet but alive with promise, the air cool and fresh against her skin, the city slowly waking around her. Each step a silent vow that she would keep moving, keep helping, keep being the person she had always promised herself she would be at the center. Mateo was already there, his hands deep in a crate of supplies. He looked up when she walked in, his face breaking into a grin that was all relief and quiet pride. "You're early," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. She smiled back, her breath steady. "I wanted to start the day right," she said, her voice calm but sure. They worked side by side in the quiet morning light, the shelves filling with canned goods and bottled water. The kids trickled in as the sun rose, their laughter bright and hopeful, a sound that reminded Nia why she had always come back. No matter how heavy the days got, she paused once to watch them. Maria, with her shy smile and bright eyes, clinging to Mateo's leg as he tried to sweep the floor, a small laugh slipped from Nia's lips, warm and soft and real. Later that day, she took a walk through the neighborhood, the familiar streets winding through her memory. Every mural, every cracked sidewalk, a testament to the lives that pulsed here. She stopped by the small park where she had once taught first aid under the shade of the old oak trees. And for a moment, she just stood there, breathing in the scent of earth and grass feeling the way the sun warmed her skin. She thought of the night in the alley, of the man's eyes, wide with fear, of the way she had stood up even when every part of her screamed to run. She thought of the governor's words, the weight of the medal she had tucked away in her drawer, and she let those memories settle not as burdens, but as threads in the tapestry of who she was becoming. She was not defined by that night, but it was part of her, and she carried it with the same quiet strength she had carried every wound, every victory, every small act of kindness that had built her life. Step by step, she stopped at a small cafe she had never noticed before, the scent of fresh bread and strong coffee drifting through the open door. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the warm light. The barista looked up, his smile easy and open. "What can I get you?" he asked. She paused for a moment, then smiled, a small but sure smile. "Just a coffee," she said, her voice calm but warm. "Something simple, something real." She took her cup to the window seat, the steam rising in soft spirals as she watched the world outside, people moving with purpose and uncertainty, each one carrying their own scars, their own stories. She sipped the coffee, its warmth spreading through her chest, and she let herself feel the quiet strength of the moment, the simple act of being alive, of choosing to keep going after everything. She walked back to the center. As the sun climbed high, the kids were in the yard playing tag, their laughter echoing off the walls. Marissa stood at the door, her arms crossed, her smile bright when she saw Nia. She called out, "Hey, hero!" and Nia laughed, shaking her head. "Don't call me that," she said, but her heart swelled with a quiet pride. Anyway, in the afternoon, she led a workshop in the back room, her voice calm and steady, as she taught the kids how to bind a wound, how to keep breathing. When the world went dark, she watched their faces bright and focused, and she saw the future in them, a future I'd almost lost, but had clawed back with every breath she took after the class. Mateo pulled her aside, his eyes searching her face. "You know, they look up to you," he said, his voice quiet. "They see what you did, what you keep doing, and it matters." She looked at him, her own eyes soft. "I just do what I can," she said, and he shook his head. "No," he said, "you do more than that. You show them. It's possible." She let his words settle deep in her chest, a quiet truth she had always known, but had never let herself name. She was a light, not because she wanted to be seen, but because the world needed to be reminded that even in the darkest night there was still warmth, still hope, still someone willing to stand up. The day ended with the sun sinking behind the buildings, the city bathed in gold and shadow. Nia walked home, her steps slow but sure, the weight of the day settling over her shoulders like a familiar cloak. She paused at the corner where the old man still played his jazz tunes, his eyes bright with the music. He lifted his hand in a small salute, and she nodded back, her smile soft. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, the key cold in her hand, the door opening to the quiet peace of home. She set her things down, the coffee cup on the counter, the faint scent of lavender in the air, and she sat for a moment by the window, her eyes on the city lights that blinked like distant stars. She took a breath steady and deep, her hand resting over the scar that had almost been her end, and she whispered to herself, "I'm still here." And in those 3 simple words she found everything she needed to keep going. The following days moved like a gentle tide. Each morning she woke to the soft glow of dawn filling her small apartment. Each breath, she took a quiet affirmation that she was still here, still moving forward. She walked to the rescue center. Each day her steps measured her side, aching with the memory of the blade, but never slowing her. The kids would be there already. Laughter echoing through the halls, the scent of pancakes and coffee drifting out from the small kitchen. Marissa always greeted her with a warm smile, her voice low and soft in the early hours. "Hey there, hero," she'd tease, and Nia would shake her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "Not a hero," she'd reply, "just someone who couldn't look away." But in the quiet of the kitchen as she poured coffee into chipped mugs, she let herself feel the warmth of those words, because she knew now that courage didn't have to be loud or flashy. It could be quiet, steady, a choice you made over and over again, even when it hurt, even when it scared you. One morning she found herself at the edge of the park, where the old oak trees stretched their limbs toward the sky. The summer breeze warm against her skin, she watched the children play, their laughter bright and hopeful, the world alive with possibility. She sat on the worn wooden bench, her eyes tracing the patterns of light and shadow that danced across the grass. She thought of the man she had saved, of the way he had looked at her in the governor's mansion, his eyes soft with gratitude, his words gentle and sure. "You saved my faith," he had said. And in that moment she had understood that what she had done was more than just an act of rescue. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still light, still goodness, still someone willing to stand up as she sat there. The old man from the corner bodega shuffled by his hat. Tipped low against the sun, he paused when he saw her, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "You look better every day, Miss Nia," he said, his voice warm and rough. She smiled, back her voice soft. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it because she did feel stronger every day, her steps steadier, her breath deeper. She still had bad nights when the memory of that blade flashed in the darkness, when her breath caught tight in her chest and her hands trembled. But she didn't let it stop her. She didn't let it keep her from stepping out into the light. Later that day, back at the center, she found herself alone in the quiet of the supply room, her hands running over the shelves of bandages and gauze, of boxes labeled with dates and names. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of antiseptic and warmth. And she let herself remember, not the fear, not the pain, but the moment she had stepped forward, the moment she had chosen to stand up, because that was who she was and who she would always be. She opened her eyes, her gaze steady, her hands surer, and she went back out to where the kids waited, their eyes wide with trust, their laughter a promise that the world could be bright again in the evenings. She walked to the streets of the Bronx, her steps slow, her eyes taking in every corner, every mural, every flicker of neon that lit the sidewalks. She stopped at the mural she had helped paint years ago, a riot of color that burst from the brick wall like a promise of hope. She traced the edge of the paint, her fingers brushing against the rough surface, and she whispered to herself, "I'm still here," the words soft but fierce, because she knew now that survival wasn't just about breath and heartbeat. It was about choosing to keep going, to keep giving, to keep believing that even the smallest act of kindness could echo louder than fear back at her apartment. She sat by the window, her journal open in her lap, her pen moving in slow, deliberate lines. She wrote about the kids at the center, about the way Maria's eyes lit up when she learned a new word, about the way Mateo laughed when he thought no one was listening. She wrote about the man she had saved, the way his voice had trembled with gratitude, the way he had said, "You gave me hope." And she wrote about herself, about the girl who had once been afraid to speak up, who had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was to simply stand up and say, "No." She closed the journal, her hand resting on the cover, the weight of the words settling in her chest like a quiet song. She knew the road ahead would be long. There would be nights when the fear came back, when the darkness felt too heavy. But she also knew that she was not the same girl she had been. She was stronger now, steadier a light in the dark, and she would keep going because there were still people to help, still voices to lift, still moments when she could choose to be the light. She rose from the chair, her reflection in the window, a silhouette against the city lights, her shoulders straight, her head high, and she whispered into the quiet of the night, "I'm ready." And in those two words was the promise of everything she had been, everything she had become, and everything she would continue to be. The morning of the anniversary of that night, Nia woke to the soft hush of rain against her window, the sky outside a soft gray that mirrored the quiet calm in her chest. She lay there for a moment, listening to the steady patter of water, the muted pulse of the city waking around her, and she let herself remember not the pain, not the fear, but the choice. The way she had stepped forward when the world had demanded she step back. She rose slowly, her breath deep and steady, dressing in simple clothes that felt like her. A soft blue shirt, jeans, worn gentle by time. She slipped on her sneakers, her hand brushing over the faint line of the scar at her side, a mark of what she had survived. But not of what defined her. She left the apartment, the rain cool against her skin, the city washed clean by the soft fall of water. She walked the familiar streets, each step a quiet celebration of survival of purpose. She stopped at the small bakery on the corner, the warm scent of bread and sugar wrapping around her like an embrace. She bought a loaf of fresh bread, a small pie just enough to share, and she carried it in a brown paper bag, the warmth of it seeping into her hands. She didn't go to the rescue center. Not that morning. Instead, she walked to the small shelter near the alley where it had all begun. The shelter that had always been a beacon for those the world had tried to forget. She knocked softly, the door opening to the familiar smile of Mrs. Lee, the older woman's eyes crinkling with warmth when she saw Nia. "Oh, child," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're here. Nia nodded, her smile quiet but certain. "I brought breakfast." She said, her voice soft and sure. The small kitchen smelled of coffee and soap, the windows fogged with the breath of a dozen souls who had found a brief refuge from the rain. She set the bread and pie on the counter, cutting small slices, handing them out with a soft word. A warm smile. She didn't tell them why she was there. Didn't tell them about the night that had nearly taken her life. This wasn't about her. This was about them, about reminding them that they mattered, that there was still kindness in the world, even when the night felt endless. As she moved through the room, her hands brushing against cold fingers offering warmth. She felt it, the quiet power of small acts, the way they could ripple out like circles in water. She looked around the room at the faces lined with weariness and hope, at the soft conversations that rose and fell like music, and she let herself believe that this was why she had survived, not for medals or ceremonies, but for this, for the quiet work of lifting others up, of holding out a hand when the world turned away. When the last of the pie was gone, she stepped outside. The rain still falling soft and steady, she tilted her face up to the sky, her eyes closing her breath. Deep and sure, she thought of the children at the center. The way Maria's laughter had lit the room, the way Mateo's hands had steadied her when she thought she might fall. She thought of the old man she had saved, the way his eyes had found hers in the quiet of that hospital room. "You gave me hope," he had said. And she carried those words with her now. A light in the dark, she walked back through the streets, the city alive around her. The wet pavement reflecting neon and headlights, a kaleidoscope of color and life. She felt the steady beat of her heart, each breath a testament to everything she had survived. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a girl who had learned that courage was in the quiet choices, in the moments when no one was watching, and she knew she would keep choosing it every day. She reached her apartment, the door closing softly behind her. The small space, warm and familiar. She set her shoes by the door, her jacket dripping water onto the mat, and she stood for a moment in the stillness, her eyes tracing the faint light that filtered through the rain. She sat at her small table, her journal open before her, the pen moving in slow, steady lines. She wrote about the shelter, about the soft smiles of strangers, about the rain that had washed the world clean. She wrote about herself, about the girl who had once been afraid, who had learned to stand up anyway, and she wrote about tomorrow, about the promise of another day, another chance to be the light. She closed the journal, her hand resting on the cover, her breath calm, her heart steady. She rose and moved to the window, the rain still falling. Outside, the city alive with the quiet song of survival. She pressed her hand to the glass, her reflection steady, her eyes bright. "I'm still here," she whispered, and in those words was the promise of everything she had been, everything she had become, and everything she would continue to be. Nia Johnson, rescuer, fighter, light in the dark. And as the rain fell around her, she knew that this was only the beginning. Nia Johnson's story is a testament to the quiet power of everyday courage, proof that even in the darkest moments, a single choice can change everything. Her journey reminds us that heroism isn't about grand gestures or medals. It's about the small, steady acts of kindness and the refusal to look away. As we reflect on Nia's story, let it be a spark for our own lives, a reminder that we all have the power to stand up, to reach out, and to be the light for someone else. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Black Lens Stories for more inspiring stories of resilience and hope. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that courage lives in all of us. And tell us in the comments, what does courage look like in your life? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep believing, keep standing up, and keep shining.